is the fact that a kilowatt hour here costs more than it does in most surrounding states. And it's one of the things that major companies look at when they come to Nevada. So when we say Saudi Arabia of the West, and whether it's solar, geothermal, wind, what have you, that still means that we have to compete with other folks, and we got a big job problem here. I heard on the way in, we've got a big job problem here, and that's one of the major competitors for generating sustaining jobs. So when you talk about the Saudi Arabia of the West, if it has to be subsidized, you better take a real careful look at that. I would substitute for the phrase green energy, the phrase responsible energy. It is responsible to use coal responsibly and not environmentally wrongly. It is responsible to use resources that are in this country, oil shale, oil sands, natural gas, all of those things in an economically and environmentally responsible fashion. So nothing against those industries, that's fine. But if you're going to make them a major part of the load in this state, then they have to be competitive with a kilowatt hour on the other bases, or you need to figure out how to make them competitive before you start forcing them as a major component on creating the Saudi Arabia of the West, if it means that we're going to go farther out of competition for the cost of a kilowatt hour into that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I like that.
The reality is when you look at alternative energy, none of those provide the backbone that you need to power a nation. You cannot power it here at home.
Exactly right.
You still have to rely on the fundamental sources of energy, which are coal, natural gas, and nuclear to a very small percentage. We need to grow nuclear power.
Yes. Yes.
Long term, we have a national security issue when it comes to our dependence on foreign oil and the amount of problems it is going to cause for us in the future and how we have to deploy our resources, including the military, around the world to safeguard those interests. If you want to make Nevada powerful for the future when it comes to energy, we can do that with four things. One, open Yucca Mountain. Two, there so that we have sustainable energy source for use throughout the country. Three, you want to make sure that we have the ability to get that material around the United States. It can be done safely. And the reality of it is, if we put open 2 nuclear power plants on the old Nevada test site, now the Nevada National Security Site, we can provide that energy inexpensively, not only for Nevada, but the Southwest as well. And lastly, there is no reason why Nevada and our education system can't become the nuclear center for excellence for the United States.
Yes, I think it is. Yay!
Our next question comes from Karen, and it goes to Senator Amodei.
Senator Amodei, we have the worst foreclosure rate in the nation. Federal plans to help homeowners have not helped here in Nevada. Should the market be allowed to correct itself, or should the federal government step in? And if so, what ways would you suggest that haven't already been tried?
Well, the market is going to correct itself regardless of what the federal government has done to date. I think we're all aware of that. So when you talk about what would I do, once again, it's the private sector is the engine that fuels the tax base and the public sector. So what you have to do is you have to say, what are the job issues in that? How do we diversify our economy? We have traditionally been dependent upon sales tax and gaming tax. We're grateful for it, but that won't continue to go. Our last period of growth for the last 10 years has been phenomenally fueled by unprecedented growth, which we now know was supported by financial policies, much of it in the mortgage industry, that were unsustainable, and the bubble broke. So what you have to look at, and by the way, it's nothing that the whole West didn't go through. So it's not a Nevada issue. And when you talk about what would you do, one of the things that I would do is, first of all, go talk to my colleagues in the Western Caucus if I was a member of the United States Congress. There's an outfit a little bit south of here called Arizona. That's who we competed with for fastest growing state in the nation status for much of the last 10 years. Their housing bubble burst too. A lot of Republicans in Congress from Arizona. Let's talk about how we do this regionally. It's not a Nevada problem, but how we do it regionally in terms of promoting the private sector to generate jobs, to generate the economy back that the growth sector used to fill in Nevada, which, by the way, during some years, generated at an even higher rate than the gaming sector did for tax revenues. And so you say specifically, what are you talking about? What I'm talking about specifically in any state Where the landlord that owns 85% of the state is the federal government, you have to get more aggressive on land use policies and land use participation for Nevada. That boils down to five basic areas. I think this: you need to farm it, you need to graze it, you need to mine it where appropriate, you need to explore it for all other types of mineral and energy potential development, and you need as unfettered an access as responsible and reasonable in terms of environmental constraints that presently are too restrictive to open that land up for everything. You cannot talk about economic development without land.
Go ahead, Ken.
Regarding that, the problem you have right now is that the federal government interfered in a private market interest and has totally tipped it upside down and screwed it up, in my opinion. The reality is, the federal government trying to use the TARP program to fundamentally change how the mortgage interest went. There was an issue with the bankers in lending money to people that shouldn't have been lent the money to begin with to afford houses that they couldn't afford.
Yep.
Then you had people that had jobs that when the economy downturned and they began to shrink, couldn't afford it. The banks right now are not being rewarded for allowing people to restructure their mortgages. They're being rewarded for allowing people to foreclose on their homes, get thrown out on the street, and they're not being penalized at all. That needs to stop. In some ways, the banking industry should work to allow people to restructure those loans down to the level that they were, while individuals have a personal responsibility to ensure that they can get into a house that they can afford. The banking industry also has an obligation to ensure that they understand what they're stepping into. Houses are the largest single investment that families will make in their entire lives. Many people use that as their future that they're going to retire to. If we're going to create those opportunities for people at the federal level, if the federal government's going to do it, they need to provide the oversight of the banking industry to ensure that people understand what they're getting into and why, so that they can live with that responsibility within the constraints that they have. Less involvement of the federal government in the mortgage industry and the marketplace is going to allow the market to self-adjust, which is what we need.
Thank you.
True.
You mentioned TARP. Do you want to go ahead and state where you stand on TARP?
When I look at TARP, I think that was a fundamental abuse of the federal government of our taxpayer dollars.
So do you think the federal government should have allowed the banks to fail?
Nobody is too big to fail. Sometimes you have to live with the consequences of hard decisions when companies go bankrupt and people get unemployed. But that doesn't mean that they wrap up, close the door, and people are thrown on the street. What that gives them an opportunity to do in bankruptcy is allow them to restructure in a manner in the private industry that they can restructure their debt,
Exactly.
recreate jobs, get people back to work, and be a functioning, successful business. Guess what? Without government.
Yes. Yes.
I agree with everything that Kurt just said. This was a vast overreach by the federal government, and it had no business overreaching in that way. The market will and has to correct itself, and it's just going to take time. It's going to cause some pain, some continued pain, but that's just the way it has to be. Let me put a different twist on this. This all really gets back to, in terms of creating jobs and dealing with the economy in Nevada, it's about taxes and regulation. We need to cut the corporate income tax in this country. It's the second highest in the world currently. It's got to be cut significantly to provide incentives for companies to create jobs, build factories, and get this economy back on track again. And you know, as I travel around Nevada, I just spent the last week traveling around rural Nevada, what I hear from ordinary business folks and individuals, more than complaints about taxes, and I hear plenty of that, is I hear complaints about over-regulation. We need to get government out of the way so businesses have an incentive to grow, expand, and create jobs. That's what will get Nevada back on track again and get this country back on track.
Okay, the next question comes from Michael and is to Commander Uphold.
Simple question. If elected, what bill would you introduce or action would you take to help curb the ever-rising price of fuel?
The first thing I would do to control the price of fuel is start getting government out of the marketplace, because that's the one with the price supports and all the taxing and regulation that we have on the industries that produce it. The problems that create the massive amount of fuel price fluctuations that we have today. Get government out. So specifically, I would look at, first and foremost, I would look at the environmental laws that can be fundamentally reformed that allow us to open refineries here at home so that we can get energy produced here to the American people at a cost that's affordable.
Yeah, good.
That's just what we do.
That's good.
Okay, Senator Burdette, Senator Rowley.
We need to get EPA out of the business lives of American companies.
That's for sure.
This EPA is acting far beyond the authority that Congress has given it, and it's undermining economic growth in this country right now.
Yep,
So that,
exactly.
getting back to the point I raised earlier, in addition to just combating and drawing back the overregulation that we have in this country right now that is hurting business and undermining economic growth, we need energy independence. I'll say it again. If we are subject to foreign sources of oil, we will never maintain or eliminate the fluctuations in prices that we see. We have to be independent. We have to have more control over the cost of energy that we need as a country. And if we can't become more independent, we're going to forever be subject to those fluctuations in high prices.
Thank you. First, when you look at the price of a gallon of gasoline or diesel today, don't forget what part of that represents state and federal taxes, because it's a big chunk. And that's not in defense of the oil companies, but it's a big chunk to remember when we talk about the price of a gallon of fuel. Second part is this. As the Congressional District in the lower 48 states with the largest number of centerline miles of road per inhabitant, it is absolutely got to be a priority for your next member of Congress in this district to do everything they can to achieve energy independence. And you say, well, do we have enough oil to do that in this country? We don't have enough oil to do it by itself, but we are a world leader in terms of coal reserves, oil shale reserves, and oil sands reserves, as well as natural gas reserves. And so when you maximize those resources to reduce, and we should, by the way, and that's a multi-tiered issue in terms of regulations, but also in terms of exploration and production and the technology to create the sort of fuel we need out of those. But the additional part is this. When you maximize that and you achieve independence for all other aspects of your energy needs, and by the way, I agree with Commander Lippel. Nuclear has a place in it. It is possible to responsibly use nuclear energy in this country and in this world. It's being done a lot of places. Processing is being done in France. So, I don't know why we don't get treated to that by our leaders in Washington. I won't blame it on the media since there's a few of you here tonight. But it is possible to achieve that independence, and by maximizing the ones we have, decrease the demand on those petroleum resources that create fuel so that we can manage our way out of this with what we've got from a position of strength. It gives you national security benefits and economic benefits.
Thank you, Senator. The next question comes from Sean and is directed to Senator Brower.
Let's talk about educating our kids. Senator Brower, Nevada is at the top of every bad list and the bottom of every good list when it comes to educating our children. There are many federal mandates, such as No Child Left Behind, that our local school districts have to meet. What can be done at the federal level to make our local schools even more local and less government run? And should parents be given more freedom in choosing schools for their children?
Well, how about starting with eliminating the Federal Department of Education? I've served in the legislature here and on the education committees in the Senate and Assembly, and I've served in Washington, and I still don't know what the Department of Education does to improve the quality of education in our schools. I don't see it. So, we did a few things in this last legislative session that were steps in the right direction. With Democrat majorities in both houses, we weren't able to get everything we wanted, but we changed the law in this state with respect to tenure for teachers. No more tenure after 1 year. That's, I think, going to be a big improvement in terms of allowing school districts the flexibility to get rid of the teachers who aren't performing. We also changed the governance structure in this state. The governor will now choose the superintendent of public instruction, and he will report, or she will report to the governor.